Okay. Hi, everyone. So as Tara already said, I did a class last year with Plaza and I loved it. So anybody who's returning, thank you so much. That remains my favorite virtual workshop that I got to do. So I'm excited to be doing another one with Plaza. Also, as Tara said, if you haven't already gone about sketching or tracing the line art that was provided, please go ahead and do so. I could talk all day about how to sketch out seashells, and that could be an entirely separate class. So I don't want us to spend too much time doing that. So go ahead and trace or sketch those out as I talk through the products that I'm going to show you guys. And then just as a reminder, I'm Abby. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I have been doing watercolor since I was in college. When I was trained in fashion school to do fashion communication using traditional watercolor techniques. And through the years, I have been introduced to many other like more modern watercolor mediums, I would say. One of them being all of Derwent's water-soluble products, which I personally love. So I'm excited to show you guys how I use them today. And we're using a great diversity of them, which is also really cool. And we're going to focus on the Derwent products, but I do want you to keep in mind, you can always use these in conjunction with your more traditional items that you use. Tara, go ahead and switch me to the overhead. Perfect. Okay. So real quick, I just put these here. This is how you can get a hold of Plaza Art, a hold of me and Derwent on Instagram. And then just as a reminder, the little hashtag for you guys. So again, go ahead and trace your sketch or sketch it out while I'm talking through this. So I know you guys got everything in the sample kit. If you have your sample kit today, you will literally be able to do the entire image that we're going to do. Okay, like I am not going far out of the sample kit today. But if you are interested in ordering the whole packet, or if you win the giveaway, this is what you're going to get. So the tinted charcoal paint pan set, I love this. It is literally tinted charcoal. It's water soluble. We're going to see today how it blends a little bit differently than like watercolor or Inktense products, but that's what makes it really cool. And you can layer it and you can make it very, very dark. So we're going to experiment with that. And then here is the shade and tone set. And I especially love this one because in this one set, that's what the box looks like. Here's what. Oh no, I just dropped all of my little pieces. One moment. Okay, so here's what you get when you get the tinted charcoal set and the shade and tone mixed media set. The really cool thing about the shade and tone mixed media set, and the reason I would really recommend getting this one if you're going to buy any Derwent products, is because you get to experiment with Inktense, you get Graphitint, and you get the tinted charcoal. So they've made this really neat palette that really has all of these different water soluble items within the single palette. Now here's your tinted charcoal. This is all tinted charcoal. I'm going to show you guys the swatches that both of these palettes will create, and you're going to see how much color is actually in the tinted charcoal. I know that it looks like a very muted palette right here, and it is, but you actually do get pretty much color out of it. And this is like one of my favorite charcoal items to use, especially with all my other watercolor materials. The other thing that I want to note before we get started is I'm going to mostly use the watercolor brush that was provided in the kit for you guys. So this is the medium water brush. You can also obviously use any of your traditional watercolor brushes that you have at home, but if you have this one, you're going to be good to go. And the plastic fork is actually going to come in as an opportunity for us to get like these really, really tiny little lines. That's why I brought that in. But if you don't have the plastic fork, don't worry, I'll show you. I can easily show you how to do that at a later date. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Here's what we're gonna do. Here is, I just wanted to swatch these out for you guys. This is, if you were to order both palettes plus the Inktense Pencils, which in your sample kit, you have this one, which is the tan. And the reason I wanted to include that is because I love water-soluble pencils. I think they're great for travel, and they can be used exactly like the palette. That's how we're going to be using them today. We're going to like use a paintbrush to just use the end of the pencil exactly as we would the little wells in the palette. So I love the versatility of these. But if you have these plus the two palettes that I showed you, you can get all of this color. So it's really beautiful. I think they're both palettes worth investing in. And the Inktense pencil sets are also absolutely a worthwhile investment. Okay. So to begin, grab your sketch, and we are gonna first tape it down. So grab your masking tape. If you're using a block of watercolor paper, you don't have to do that, but I went ahead and cut mine apart so that I would be using similar paper that you guys are using, because I know that you actually got the Arches paper in your kit today. And the reason I really love using Arches watercolor cold press paper is because of the texture. So if you're familiar with Arches watercolor paper, you might know that they also make, I think it's like there's a hot press, cold press, and then I think there's even like a rough press or something. I forget what they call that one. I never get that one. The hot press is a lot smoother. The cold press has a little bit of a tooth to it. And I use the cold press all the time just because I like the texture. I think it holds up really well with multiple layers of water. I'm just taping this down. And the reason I'm taping my paper down is just so that it doesn't warp. That's like number one best lesson to learn in watercolor. Always tape your paper down. I'm also taping mine to a board right now. Sometimes I tape it directly to the tabletop, whatever works for you. And then you also might notice how light I drew my lines. That was purposeful. In fact, if I wasn't doing a watercolor workshop right now online, I would probably have even lighter lines. My goal with my watercolor paintings is to always try to just diminish any pencil lines that would show up at the end. And once you do add water over top of your pencil, or watercolor pigment or water, it's gonna keep the pencil lines on there, so you can't really erase it after you've already applied your color. So I would urge you to just consider that in the future when you're doing any watercolor painting, and try to keep those lines very, very light. Okay, so step one, we taped our paper down. Step two, I am going to begin by doing a wet on wet technique. And again, I'm going to use my water brush here. Now, you can use this water brush. You can use your little push button here, and then the water will actually come out of the tip. I'm not going to use it that way today. I usually don't. I actually just have a cup of water right here. And so I'm going to use it like a traditional brush. And the first color that we're going to use is going to be the tan Inktense pencil. So go ahead and grab that. And I'm just going to fill, we're doing wet on wet technique. So I'm going to fill my shadow here for my first shell. with clear water. And the cadence of this workshop is going to go like this. We're going to do this first shell, and then we can talk about the products. You guys can ask them questions, and then we'll do the second one for the second portion of the class. So I'm just adding my clear water here. If you've been watercolor painting for quite some time, you probably are very familiar with the wet-on-wet technique. If you're new to this is my absolute favorite technique in watercolor. It is what allows the medium to be so organic and pretty with how it blends out, because the pigment is going to fill the area that is wet and it won't go outside of that. Okay. So my paper is wet, just in the shaded area. I'm going to take my pencil. So these Inktense pencils are exactly like the Inktense palette that you can buy. They're just in pencil form, and there are a lot more colors, which is very cool. And this is how I'm going to use it. So I've got a wet paintbrush, and I'm literally just going like this. And then I'm going to let it bleed in there. Later on in the class, we are going to use these pencils in a different way.
That's a really cool pointer though, Abby. Like if you're traveling or doing plein air or something and you don't want to take your set of watercolors with you, you could just have a few pencils and use them both ways. That's really neat.
Yeah, and I actually, so I took all of the pencils. I did a whole pencil thing when I went to Switzerland. I only brought pencils, and I loved it because, again, you can use these as, you can use them as a pencil, but you can also use them as like again, like a paint well, like you would the other palettes, which you can't do the same when you just have the palette with you. You obviously can't use that as a pencil. And then again, all the additional colors that you get in like the 72 set of the Inktense pencils, it just gives you so much versatility. So I'm just going to continue layering this. I do want to point out, so with Inktense, it dries permanent. Okay, not all of the mediums that we're going to use today will have that same quality, but Inktense will dry and it will be permanent. So you can layer and layer and layer and it's not going to blend. And I'm just going to put a little bit over here. I also love the pencils because you can obviously sharpen them. And then you can get a super fine point, which you could do with like, obviously a watercolor brush as well. But yeah, with the pencils, you can get them really, really sharp. Okay, so if you've never used Inktense before, you might notice that the color would bleed out really fast. I think that they're beautiful. They definitely like bleed out and fill your area. And now I'm going to grab my tinted charcoal. And I'm going to use Thistle, which you guys do have in your set. So I'm going to use Thistle, which is right here. It's a really pretty dark purple. And as you're getting it wet, you might notice just the difference in how the water reacts with it a little bit. Okay. And then once I put this on here, notice how it doesn't bleed out nearly as much as the Inktense does. Just going to run it right along the edge of my shell. I do want to mention again, my favorite thing about the tinted charcoal is the fact that you just get these really pretty muted natural colors. Like I did a whole like shark tooth painting study using the tinted charcoal, and it was really neat.
Abby, I apologize if you already said this, but with the tinted charcoal, if you were doing a piece, let's say exclusively in the tinted charcoal, once it's dry, can you go in and erase and do subtractive stuff? Or
I've done so I've done a little bit of subtractive stuff. It's not gonna come all the way off for me.
Okay.
It doesn't anyway. I have been able to like take an eraser to it, especially like the darker areas, and get some of it up. I've been able to take like some water to it and get a little bit of it up. But it's not gonna come up like if you were using, just charcoal pencils.
Cool, that's great. I've always wondered that, so I appreciate it. And it's nice to know that
And I think,
it
it's a
works
good
to a certain
question.
extent.
I think part of it is that, when you're like, anytime you're using water, you're putting the pigment into the paper. I mean, it's becoming part of the paper to some extent. So you're not going to be able to like completely subtract it out.
Absolutely makes sense.
Okay, so if you guys saw in the list, I did recommend just also getting the mauve pencil. And the reason I wanted you guys to do this is just to see the vibrancy of Inktense compared to the more muted colors that you get with tinted charcoal. So what I'm going to show you right now is just if I were to grab the mauve, which I think is it's just a beautiful, another purple option. I'm going to add it in here, and I hope you can see how it would just take your shadow. This would just be like a personal preference thing for whatever painting you're doing. It's going to take your shadow from being that really dark, muted thistle, and it'll just add a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of like a color pop in there. So again, just like comparing the differences of these specifically Derwent materials. But I love combining them. It's my favorite thing to do now, because they all have a specific purpose and their strengths. And when you combine them, then you can do some really creative stuff. Okay. So I'm happy with my shadow. Now.
Hey, Abby, Becky has a good question.
Yeah.
If it dries permanent, I assume referencing Inktense, will it hurt your brush if it dries in your brush?
No. I've never had that be a problem. And I know that I've failed at washing out my brushes before, and then I just put them in water and it came out. So good question. I mean, I guess I can't say that for sure, because I've never like put Inktense all over a brush and then just let it sit. But I've also never had that be an issue, and I use these all the time. So good question. Okay, so now we're gonna move into adding all of this it's mountain blue. And it did come in your set as well, and it is tinted charcoal. So this is the next part that we're gonna do, this base layer on our shell. And I'm gonna start by doing the wet on wet technique again, and then we're gonna switch over to the wet on dry. So I want you to leave a really thin white line. Keep it dry. I'll show you on here. Right along there. Just so that your shell kind of stands out a little bit from the dark shadow underneath. Try to put this up here so you guys can see what I'm grabbing. Okay, so I'm just going to start right underneath this first edge, I guess, of the shell. Gonna add some water in there. Again, I'm gonna make sure, because this is probably still wet on your paper. So definitely make sure to maintain a little white edge between that and where you're gonna put this blue. Now we're gonna see what happens when we do wet on wet technique with the tinted charcoal instead of the Inktense first. And it's, again, it's not gonna blend out quite as much as the Inktense does. Here's my mountain blue. I love this color. So you can see how it bleeds out, but again, not quite as much as the Inktense does. Which is also interesting to consider. Like, some people like to have a lot more control. Some people don't like doing watercolor because they feel like they don't have enough control over it. And I personally feel like with the tinted charcoal, especially, even when you do the wet on wet technique, you have a little bit, because it doesn't bleed out quite as much as Inktense or as watercolor paints, you have a little bit more control over it than you would with your other watercolor mediums. I'm just going to keep bringing this down. And now I've kind of transitioned into doing this part of my paper over here is dry. So now I'm kind of doing the wet on dry technique as I bring it over here. And what I'm doing, just to show you guys what you're trying to accomplish here, is again, you're going to bring the shadow right underneath here because the sunlight would be coming from this direction. And we're just going to fill that in. Trying to put this like, let me see. Here, I can leave that there for you guys.
Abby, a couple folks are asking about the sample kit colors because they're not necessarily labeled because they're just those individual hands. Would you mind clarifying?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I don't know how well you guys, it's kind of hard to see that color. The mountain blue, it literally looks like a dusty blue. That's what I'm using right now. Is that helpful to know? And then the thistle that I was using before, it looks like a really dark, dusty purple. And we haven't gotten to the other two yet. The sepia ink, it looks like it's black almost. And then the graphitant one, which is the autumn brown, that just looks like a brown. So is that helpful, Tara? Are you getting any feedback?
I think it is. I think just, it is hard with the tinted charcoal because they're all so dark, but I think that's helpful. Please let us know if you need any more clarification. Great question.
Yeah, the blue is definitely, like, the blue should be pretty clearly blue for you. Because it's kind of the lightest color in the tinted charcoal. That's why I chose it. Okay, so now I'm just going to bring this down here. Again, I'm just kind of doing a base layer for my shadow.
A bunch of folks actually commented that they swatched them out, so that really helps.
Oh,
which
yeah.
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah, no,
Yes,
great. Thank you all.
it does. I think that's a really good point. That's why I showed the swatch card of because honestly, when you see the whole palette, like if you would just be looking at this and you're trying to decide if you're going to buy it, it does look, I mean, they all look pretty similar. And then you swatch them out and you're like, oh, wow, there is actually a lot of color, a lot of versatility in there. Okay, so I'm just continuing to layer this. And then I'm bringing my shadow down like I did right here. Again, making sure not to blend in with your shadow, which may or may not be dry for you at this point. For me, it's still not dry. And as you do this, I encourage you to like get more and more charcoal on your brush and see how it really starts layering up there. Just going to bring this all the way down. We're starting to get the shape of our shell. And then up at the top, just going to do, this is the wet on dry technique. So I just have paint and pigment on my brush, dry paper. And I'm just going to add some of this shadowing up here. You don't have to get like too precise with it for this class, because the point of this is to get familiar with all the different water soluble media, but yeah, just give yourself a little bit of a hint of shadow up here. And I'm going to do very little bit coming from this edge. Okay, so now I still have some water in my paper. I'm going to add a little bit more pigment in here. So if your paper is still wet, this is where we're going to start adding some of these lines and some of this texture. There are so many different ways you can do this. You can use tiny little paintbrushes that you might have at home. That's probably the most traditional way. We're going to use the tip of this brush, which is actually a great tip considering, especially that it's a synthetic brush. I'm always super shocked at how fine of a line I can get with this medium water brush. But I also like to see what I have laying around. So not everybody has a whole bunch of watercolor brushes. And sometimes I'll do things like grab a plastic fork and pull off one of the little prongs. I guess that's a prong. And then while my paper is still wet, I hope you guys can see me do this. I can just start pulling some lines. And what this is going to do is also add some texture into your paper. Just wait, I think you can kind of see it starting to show up right there. Tara, can you see that? So I'm actually kind of like digging into my paper, which is going to give me texture over time as it dries, because the pigment's going to like kind of go deeper into the paper there. And so this is, I do a lot of pet portraits. I'll do this a lot to create like fine lines for hair. Okay, are you guys seeing that? And again, over time, so I'm just going to go all the way down, because then when we add more pigment, you're going to see it better. And again, over time, as it dries, that pigment's going to kind of land in those grooves. You can also use it in such a way that if I put a whole bunch of pigment in one area with some water, Like you're there, that's a good one where you can see how it's like filling that in. And pull it right out. And then you can also take your actual little prong, and I don't know, some people might frown on this, but sometimes I'll actually put it in like directly into my charcoal. So I'm actually getting charcoal on the end of it, and you can make some really dark lines with it, very dark, sharp lines. I also did some of these little dots in that way. If you've ever looked at a shell, where's my seashell? Here's my shell. I don't know what these are technically called, but all the little dots right along the edge of each layer. I should know my technical terms for seashell, but whatever those are, adding that texture in there, I did that using this little guy. So if you're ever at home or if you're traveling and you don't have all of your watercolor brushes, or you feel like you can't get a fine enough line, there's probably something laying around that will help you get that. I'm going to go back to my brush now, because I also want to show you how I can do those very similar lines using my paintbrush. And as I add more pigment here, you should be able to see that charcoal go into those lines that I created using that. Okay. Just going to add a little bit more shading over here. And my texture is starting to show up really nicely, which I'm happy about. Okay, and then I would urge you again, if you are using this brush like I am, and if you haven't used it before, just go ahead and just try to see how light of a line you can get using just the tip of your brush. I use a pretty dry brush when I do this. Oh, I feel like it's kind of hard for you guys. Like it's such a fine line that you can hardly see it. But there, that's how fine of a line I can get using this medium tip brush. And they do actually make a thin one as well, or a fine, I guess it's called fine. You can get a whole pack of these. And they are very convenient for traveling. So I'm just going to add a couple more lines here. Do this however you choose. Okay. And then I'm going to go up to the top part of my shell. I'm going to add just some of these dots and texture up here. And I hope that you're noticing too, if you're new to the tinted charcoal, I hope that you're finding that as you build your layers, you can see just how dark you can get your shading to be. Okay. I think that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. I tend to overwork these things sometimes. Okay, so now we're gonna go back to our thistle. We're gonna start layering that thistle back in. And we're just gonna do the very darkest of the dark on our seashell for shading. So your thistle is gonna be the one that, well, for me, it's right here, but it looks like, well, it's not the one that looks black, and it's not the one that looks brown. It's the other one. And I'm gonna do the wet on dry technique. So I'm just getting a bunch of pigment into my brush. I'm going to start with this dark shadow right here, because that's actually kind of where you're seeing the inside part of the shell. And you can see just how dark I can get that to be. Take it all the way down here. And suddenly your shell looks like it's popping off the paper. I'm going to grab some more of this, and I'm going to add a little bit more at the top. So just, continue to build your texture and your shadowing. Bring in some lines across. One thing I did do over here that I don't even know if you guys can quite see, I did use my little fork to go like this. You can see it better in the one that I just did, just to get some texture, because if you look at the seashell up close, there's like texture lines going this way, and then they're also going down this way. So while my paper is still wet, I can pull some of that down. And that's one way to control the very, very, very lightest of texture that you want to add. Now I'm gonna grab my tan pencil again. And I want to just I feel like my screen isn't showing this all that. Let me see if I can. I feel like my screen is muting the colors a little bit, but I actually kind of mixed a little bit of tan and the carmine pink. So if you saw on the list, I recommended getting this pencil as well, which is the carmine pink, because what I'm gonna do is use the tan and that pink to just bring in a little bit of like vibrant, colorful highlight to this part of the shell where the sunshine would be hitting it. Again, I feel like on my screen, it's showing up as just a kind of a muted shadow, which is kind of a bummer. But for me, it does look a little pinkish orange in real life. So if you have those with you, go ahead and grab your tan pencil and your pink pencil. You're going to do just the teeniest bit of pigment. I'm going to do it with the wet on dry technique because I don't want too much to run out. I want to have very good control of this. I'm gonna get a little bit of this. I'm just gonna run it right along there, right along my edge. And I'm gonna grab a little bit of that pink. Let that bleed into there a little bit. And I really feel like you guys can, well, I don't know, maybe it's my computer screen. I just really feel like this is not showing up as vibrant as I want it to look.
I can see it on my end. It looks pretty bright. I could definitely see the pink
Does that
color.
look pink? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it definitely
Okay.
does.
Okay. Just a little bit. You don't want to like, don't overkill it with this. It should dry and kind of like that. And then the last thing I'm going to do to this seashell is I just want to call out some more of these lines to give it like a little bit more dimension than I have here. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of mountain blue. I'm just going to use my brush to do this. And just bring some of those lines around. I'm actually kind of following where I did my texture lines with the fork. Okay. I'm going to call that guy done, I think. If you would want to, you could grab a little bit more thistle. I did a really dark shadow along here. You know, you can always do that if you want to come back. I mean, you could build this up all day long if you wanted to. And just kind of experimenting with adding those layers and getting familiar with how dark you can get all of this different water soluble, all these different water soluble tools. Okay. The last thing we're gonna do to this shell. So if you have any of the Derwent palettes at your house, you're gonna notice that they come with this little sponge. And this sponge is supposed to be for like drying out your brush. I always just use a towel, so I don't ever use it for that. But what I have found is that this is a handy little thing to have with you if you're trying to create some rough texture. And so that's what I use it for. So in order to do all of this right here, I'm gonna grab my tan pencil. Got this little guy again. I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna dip it into my water. Right here, I'm literally just gonna go like this. Okay. And if you have like a little, if you've got a piece of scrap paper, I would recommend testing it out on there first before you would do this on any painting. But got a wet sponge. Again, I'm just using my pencil like this. And I'm going to create some texture with it. Because we're on a sandy beach. And suddenly you've filled your paper, this part anyway, you've kind of grounded your shell. It looks like it's actually resting on a beach. There you go. So that is our first seashell, which I call a beauty shell. I don't know if anyone else calls it that. The next one that we're going to do is a very different kind of seashell. So do we have any questions about that? I mean, that was more focused on the tinted charcoal. I know we also use the Inktense pencils, but we're going to switch over to the shade and tone mixed media set. We're also going to use the tinted charcoal, but we're going to add in some of the other little wells that you guys got. So are there any specific questions before I move on to this shell? Nothing, Tara? Should I go on?
Nothing coming through in the chat, just about to say.
Okay. This is still wet, but once this dries, I am going to put this here for us so that we can see this, but just bear with me until that dries a little bit more. I'm going to put right here for now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, you get to do the wet on wet technique again for the shadowing underneath the shell. Practice it again. We're going to do the same thing. Grab your tan pencil. I am going to add in one more little technique though this time. So I'm just going to fill my area here, my shadow here. I'll show you guys. I'm going to fill in this area right here. Just filling that in with clear water. Oh, this is called a lettered olive shell is what I learned. I hope that's right. If there are any biologists on here who want to correct me, please do so. But I was wondering what this shell was called. This is it. And I love these guys, but I never knew what they were actually called. All right, so I'm just filling that in. And then I'm gonna use my paintbrush with my pencil again. Gonna let that bleed in there. Okay, so if I use one of my Inktense pencils in this way, with the wet on wet technique, using a paintbrush, keyword there, using a paintbrush, I can get that, you know, that very recognizable like watercolor organic bleed look. But here's something else I can do with these pencils that I can't do with watercolor. So you can use it as a pencil directly onto your wet paper. And when I do this, this allows me to put pigment on the paper in a very specific location. It might bleed out a little bit depending on how much water you have down. But this is going to be a very specific application. So you can see how dark that is there. This is one of my favorite things to do with these pencils. It's a great way to add really, really dark color and be able to, or I shouldn't say dark color, just when you're trying to really build up any color, it's a great way to do it. And you can't really achieve it with other watercolor media. And you can get so precise with it because again, it's a pencil, so I could even sharpen this point more so than that. Now, if I go back with my brush, I can kind of bleed it out. But a lot of that pigment is going to stay exactly where I put it. And again, this is Inktense, so it's going to be permanent once it dries. So whether you like that technique or not right now, you know, it's not always perfect for what we're doing, but just keep it in mind that that's something that you can do with Inktense pencils that you can't really do with your other watercolor. All right, now I have that. Now I'm going to come in with my thistle like I did over here. I'm going to go around there. So getting this area right here. And then on this one, you can probably see that it's a little bit more of that vibrant purple. That's because I was using my mauve pencil. Just adding a little bit of brightness. All right, so while I'm on the subject of these pencils, I do want to show you guys the one other technique that I commonly use with these. I'm not going to do it in the shell painting at all, so I'm just going to go ahead and show you guys. You can do dry on dry, and then you can use water to blend it. So ideally you want to have a dry pencil though, and mine are a little bit wet. Let's see. This is my carmine pink. So you can just draw color an area in on your paper, then get your water brush. So I just have clear water on my brush right now. You can see just how bright it is. When you do this, especially on a more textured piece of paper, like the cold press, as opposed to the hot press paper that I mentioned in the beginning, it will have a bit of that texture left over. So as opposed to like using the Inktense palette or applying it in such a way by, you know, using your brush and grabbing the color off of here, the pigment off of here, and then adding it. If you do it in the way that I just did, you'll know, yeah, there you go. You can kind of see how you're getting some of that texture of the paper. That's always going to come through because you applied it directly to the dry paper, if that makes sense. But it's another way to just bring in some interesting textures, and it's a fun way to use the pencils in yet another way. Okay, so I have my little shadowing here. Now we're going to bring in the Graphitint, your autumn brown. So this is the little brown well that came out of the shade and tone mixed media set. Graphitint, I don't have my Graphitint palette out here right now, but I would show that to you guys as well. So Derwent makes an entire palette of Graphitint. They also have the Graphitint pencils, which are the water-soluble pencil version. It's literally graphite mixed with pigment. So in the exact same way that the tinted charcoal is just charcoal mixed with pigment, the Graphitint is mixed with pigment. What's really cool about it is if you know that graphite has a little bit of a sheen to it, and it does help mute the color, but it definitely gives your paintings like a, I don't know, this pretty slight shine, but still organic, very earthy look to it. If you're using the whole palette, it's this guy right here. And if you just have your well, it's the one that looks brown. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start. We're going to start up at this part so that we can let our shadow dry as we work. And I'm going to do the wet on dry technique in this case. So I'm going to use my brush, get a little bit of that graphitin on there. And I'm just going to start adding this shadowing in along the ridge lines that you see. And I am going to pull out my little fork again to create some texture.
Hey, Abby.
Mm-hmm.
Joanna's wondering if there's any way at all to lift Inktense.
No, when it's still, even like when it's wet on there, you really can't get it out. That's what I've learned to love about it. And but it does definitely like, so unlike traditional watercolors, which you can lift to some extent even after they're dry, Inktense is it's there. But the cool thing about knowing that is that once you let it dry, you really can layer your colors, and unlike traditional watercolor, they're not going to muddy together. So I will specifically use them at times when I know that I want to like layer colors, and I don't want the muddy mixing. And then in other cases, I'll use traditional watercolor because I know that I want to be subtracting or lifting. Okay, I'm going to grab my little pencil. So I have pretty much water on here. Just going to pull my lines down.
What color are you using right now?
This is the autumn brown, so it's the graphitin well that
Thank you.
I keep calling these wells, Tara. Is that do you know what I'm talking about when I say
well, pans,
yes,
you
pan.
know, I think everybody kind of gets it. But yeah, in the quote unquote industry, they're referred to as pans.
Pans. I'm so used to like when I talk about I have like a ton of watercolor palettes, and I'm like, oh, that's my green well. So I don't know. That's just what I call them.
Yeah, well, you know, palette wells are consistent with palette. I don't know. I don't know where pan came from.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to look that up.
So there we go. This one is much darker than what I did over here, but that's okay. Okay, and then if you want to, actually on this guy over here, I used thistle and mauve as well as the autumn brown. So you can either just leave it as autumn brown, you could pull out your mauve pencil if you have it. You can experiment with adding this directly onto there while it's still wet, which I can see it's kind of bleeding into it. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that, but and then if you want to blend a little bit, you can do that too. There you go. Just get a little bit of shading up there. We are on step 10 of 18 steps, just to let you guys know. Going on to step 11. Okay, so next we're going to paint the main shell. And we're either going to use Mars orange or you're going to use tan and autumn brown. I'm going to use Mars orange, and here's why. Because if anybody did actually get these palettes, or if anyone already had the palettes at home, I want you guys to be able to see a couple of the other colors that come in them and just how bright they are. So Mars orange is right here for me. If you are going to do this using your tan pencil and your autumn brown, then this is what you're gonna do. Do exactly like, you know, we've been applying before. Get some tan. I'm gonna put tan down, and then you're gonna grab some of your autumn brown. Mix that in there. So that you kind of get this like yellow brown finish for your shell. Okay, that's what you're going to use. If you have the entire shade and tone mixed media set, you can do what I'm going to do. And I'm going to use this Mars brown right here. So this is an Inktense pan in this case. I'm going to grab a little bit of pigment and a whole lot of water. I'm going to start coloring in the base color of my shell here. And as I do this, I'm going to leave some highlighted areas, so some dry areas. Okay, so keep in mind anywhere that you place your water, the pigment's going to run into there. So anything that you want to keep white, keep that area dry. I'm going to add some dimension in here as you're going. Again, these are seashells, so they like the curve in all these different ways. Like this little shell. It almost has like these like lips on it as it goes up at different points. And that's what I was creating over here. Just keep adding that color in. And don't worry about it too much. Just kind of let it bleed in wherever it goes. It's a seashell, so. You can kind of start adding some of your texture just by, so my paper's still wet. But I want to start adding some of those striations onto my shell. And as your paper dries just a little bit, you're going to find that you have slightly more control. If I were to add some of my tan here, I'll just throw that in there. You might be able to see how it's just a bit more yellow. Okay, now I want to show you the carmine pink. If anybody did go and actually order the carmine pink, this is where I used it. Again, I don't know how well I guess you can kind of see how that area is pink right there. So what I did is while my base layer is still a little wet, just grabbed some of this pink. And I just let it bleed in there. You can do as much or as little as you want. Your shell can be all pink and purple if you want it to be. And then I'm just going to bring some of this down into here. And I do realize I'm kind of switching between the wet on wet and the wet on dry technique. So if I'm confusing anyone by doing that, please let me know. I'm happy to try to talk to, some of it is just over time getting comfortable with like, you know, switching back and forth. At times you might have noticed that I even like grabbed pigment from up here. I didn't even go over to my paint pan and just added it in down here. It kind of depends on like how much water I have on my paper, how much pigment I have. It's one way that I can control the amount of pigment that I have down, because I can, while it's still wet, I can kind of grab some of it off of there and move it to another location. Okay, so that's my base. I want to make this guy a little bit more pink. I don't know why, I just do today. Okay. Now, my paper is still a little bit wet, not as wet as, you know, when I first put it on. That's important because I'm going to have a little bit more control. If you have thistle, you can go ahead and grab that. If you have your mauve pencil and you want to keep this shell a little bit more vibrant, that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to grab my mauve. I'm going to start adding this detail up here. So I'm just going to go right along the edge. I add a couple little dots of mauve up there, and then I'm going to pull them down. And I'm going to add some thistle too, just to show you guys. And then I'm just going to start bringing that down. I'm going to use my brush right now. But I'm also going to, again, create that texture, those grooves in my paper. That's how I got some of these really, really sharp, thin lines. Because I literally went in and like did a groove into the paper. I'm almost like carving it out to get the pigment to go down in there. I never realized how much I actually love doing this until recently, again, when I was doing pet portraits. And I was like, ooh, this is a great way to create very fine hairs. And now I love doing it. So I'm getting all of those really, really thin lines. And then you can also go widthwise. Okay, so we're starting to get some shape here. Want to get a little bit more purple in here. Or mauve, I'm sorry, mauve. Just keep building that up, however much you want to. And start adding some dimension down here. And then again, I hope I'm not like throwing too many techniques at you guys. But I am going to show you how in this case, if you want to use your pencil as a pencil directly onto your wet area, this would be a good time to do it. So if you've got a mauve pencil, you can literally draw directly onto those wet areas. And it is going to stay exactly where you put it. Which is just another way to get some of that texture on there. Some of these little dots that are on there. if you are feeling like a little bit overwhelmed with all the different techniques, um, just don't just practice them over time, get used to them like one at a time. I just want to introduce you guys to them today. Okay, I feel pretty good about that. I'm now going to paint the inside of my shell here. So we want to add some really dark shadowing in there. And for that, I'm going to use, you can use mauve or thistle. And then we're also going to bring in the sepia ink, which is the pan that all, it's going to look black to you guys. It's this one right here. I love using this as opposed to black. I hardly ever use black in any of my paintings. But the sepia ink is just really, it's just a very nice, super dark hue to add to any other colors that you're just trying to mute. Okay, so I'm going to start with, I'll use my mauve this time. Or I'm sorry, thistle. I'm going to use thistle. I'm going to grab my thistle. I'm going to do wet on dry. And making sure not to bleed it into the color that I have here. I'm going to go right along my edge. You should see these little bumps in the sketch, which is, again, I don't know how to technically talk about a seashell, but it's just, I don't know, it's part it's part of the shell texture. This little, these lines. Ooh, and suddenly our seashell is getting some dimension. And then if you, again, if you want to see what your colorful Inktense will do, here's the mauve that I'm putting into it. Adds a little bit of vibrance in there. And I'm just going to pull some of that this way. Get that dimension. Now, I really, really, really want this to be super dark right along the edge. And again, I just wanted to pull in the sepia ink because it's an Inktense pan, which means it dries permanent. And I love using this for, I do children's books and sometimes I'll do like outlines of things. And I just love this one for this. So I wanted you guys to get introduced to it. I'm just going to get a lot of it on the end of my brush there. I'm going to go right along the edge. And I hope that what you'll see is that opposed to like this shell over here where we didn't use any of the sepia ink, I want you to see like the dark shadow that you can get with it over here. And my paper is still wet everywhere in this area, so it should bleed out organically. Like I don't have like a hard edge from it. Just running it right along there. Okay. I feel good about that. I'm going to move on to this little edge right here. So where the shell's wrapping around and the color's starting to show again. And for that, I'm going to use my Mars orange and my tan. I'll use a little bit of tan. You can use tan and autumn brown. In a second here, we're going to use more of the autumn brown. So I'm going to do just a little bit of pigment and water on the edge of my brush. And just follow right along the edge there. Not too dark. Bring it all the way down. And while that's kind of wet, I'm going to grab some autumn brown. And just run it right along the edge there. Okay. Feels so beachy, guys. I feel like we're at the beach. Okay. The rest of this seashell is just adding all of the texture that you guys see. And so what I'm going to do is you can follow along with me. You can also experiment with all the techniques that we've already used at your own pace. But I'm just going to continue to add all this texture using the pencil. I'm going to use the fork. I'm going to use my paintbrush, and I'm going to use all the different colors. So again, feel free to follow along, or feel free to like take this time and experiment, and then we're going to see what you did at the end when we do the gallery view. I'm actually going to use my tan right now, and this is almost dry for me, but keep in mind it's almost all of this is the Inktense, so I can add water on top of here and it's not going to blend together, because what I want right now is I want to add texture using my pencil, but I want to use my pencil in the way that I showed you earlier, where the paper is wet and I'm just going to draw into it. So again, beauty of Inktense, it's already permanent, it's in there. I'm going to grab some water, going to add it on top here. And then with my tan pencil, just going to start adding some texture lines. I'm going to blend it a little bit with my paintbrush. Okay. I'm going to use a little bit more autumn brown. I hope that you did notice too with the autumn brown, to me, the graphitint and the tinted charcoal blend out in a similar fashion. The Inktense will bleed out much faster, whereas the graphitint and the tinted charcoal, again, you have a little bit more control over them. They don't, the color doesn't seem to go everywhere. So even though this is actually wet over here for me right now, I can add that graphitint right on top of there, and I can be really precise with where I'm putting it. I want to call this out. Building it up. Put a little bit of lines into my highlight there. And then I'm actually going to grab a little bit of that sepia ink again, because that's how I did some of these little dots. Which if you look at the shell, Got some really dark ones, some that are almost like purple blue. So that's why I'm using all these different colors to get all that texture and all those details, because by using the different colors, it makes it look just a little bit more natural. Just going to add some of my little dots over there. And then right down here, using my sepia ink, I'm really going to call out the dimension and like these swirls, the wrapping around of the bottom of the shell. Okay. The last thing I'm going to do to this little guy, I kind of want it to be a little bit more dry than this, is my other favorite technique. These are like, I think I've said this is my favorite technique like 5 times. I love all these techniques. I always love doing a little splatter method. So I bet a lot of people on here have already done that, but I think it's one of the best ways to add actual randomized texture to any type of wildlife painting. So just going to use my little brush here. Going to get a little bit of that sepia ink on my brush with some water. I want this to be controlled, so maybe you can see where I did it over here. It's very, very light. I recommend like trying it on another piece of paper first. I'm just going to use my finger like this. You can see how that splatter is kind of happening. So I'm just going to go right along this edge of my shell and do it. And it's just going to give it like a little bit of like a natural grittiness that I love about seashells and about the beach. And if it gets off your shell, who cares? It just did there for me. Okay, finally, I'm going to add some more sand around my shell, just like we did before. So if you have your, if you've got one of these, go ahead and grab that. If you have a paintbrush, you know what? Here, I can do it that way this time. Let's use like a dry brush method to do this. So you can use your sponge again, or I'm going to use a really, really, really bad brush for this. I don't even know where this is from. I will, like, I specifically want I don't even know, the really hard bristles for this kind of a thing. Gonna get a little bit of water on there. Get some little bit of pigment. I'm gonna see how this looks before I do it. And just give yourself some tan. Well, tan sand. I don't always like doing stuff like this with my really good watercolor brushes, just because, I mean, you won't really ruin them, but I like taking a super cheap brush and just being able to get really gritty and not care if I ruin the bristles on it. Okay, so that's doing it with the brush. Again, if I want to grab this little guy, which I just love that these come in every single one of the palettes that you get from Derwent. I'm not using them correctly, but I use them in my own way. Just kind of fill that space to ground your little seashell. I got some of my sepia ink out there. That's okay. And then if you want to, you can also experiment right now with using this pencil in other splatter method form. So if I get some water on the end of this pencil, I can then do this. And suddenly I'm getting a little bit of texture in my sand. Which I also love to do. And because, how do I, you know, Tara, I'm gonna watch this video later and I'm gonna be like, I sound so silly saying something like that. Because I never know how to explain exactly what I'm trying to. The thing about using the actual pencil to do the splatter method is that the splatter that you get is so pigment rich. That's a good way to put it. So like this little splatter is so much more pigment rich than if I were to, let's say, go like this, get it onto the end of my pencil or my brush and do it in like a traditional way. It's just so much lighter. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I can tell that that is so much lighter than if I'm literally just like flicking it off the end of the pencil. So I love using these pencils in that way too, when I'm doing like a really, I don't know, like a wild, I did a painting of a flamingo the other day and I wanted like this really vibrant splatter and I used Inktense pencils for it. So I hope you guys can see the difference that you can get in even the splatter method when you use like a pencil versus a paint pan. Okay. Oh, there's one more thing that I want to show you guys. So I've had a lot of questions about well, in general, like, you know, one of the things that's difficult with watercolor is that if you want an area of your paper to be, or a part of your painting to be white, you had to have left it dry. Otherwise, it's not going to be white anymore. If you add the tinted charcoal set into your toolkit, then you'll have white tinted charcoal that you can add on top of your painting. And it's just another way to get some white back into the areas that maybe you couldn't achieve by subtraction. So I did it here. I don't know how well you guys can tell. That's white that I put over top just to show that you can pull out, you can add a highlight in this case using the tinted charcoal. So like right here, I can do it. Let's just say that I want this little lip here to have a highlight. You can layer this up. And I hope you guys can see. Tara, can you see how that's like creating a highlight there?
I can. It looks pretty, well, no, actually it's popping out more. It's not as subtle. How many layers do you have to go over? Obviously, it's pretty transparent, right?
Yeah, well, it depends. Like, I think right now I just don't have a ton of water on my brush.
Yeah.
It actually looks really white to me. I don't think
Okay.
like it's not. If you were to do it on like a darker area, like
Oh
is that
yeah, definitely
yeah.
pops. Yeah. Oh,
So
it's really opaque actually.
yeah. So if you opaque, duh, thank you, Tara. That's the word I was looking for. So if you get these sets from Derwent, then you have an opaque white option that you can add to your future paintings. Okay, so that's pretty much it. It is only 2:40 right now, so we still have 20 more minutes. If you guys have any questions or if you want me to show you anything in addition to what I've already done here.
Since Abby's not actively teaching, I think Abby people are probably finishing up or playing around with their paintings. But since you're not actively teaching at the moment, I would say folks can take themselves off mute to ask questions. Okay, so Teddy's asking, please review what dries and can't be changed and what can. Thanks, great class.
Yeah, you know what? Sure. So the biggest thing to remember with everything that we just reviewed is that Inktense will dry permanent. And if you are going to invest in Inktense products, I would say purchase them knowing that that is one of their best strengths, because you really can't get that in traditional watercolor as well as these other tools. I'm gonna maybe ruin a painting right now, but that's okay. Okay, so this is me erasing some of the mountain blue. I hope you guys saw how dark there. Here's the comparison. This is the tinted charcoal, okay? This little area right here was as dark as that. And then I was able to erase it to that point. So I can't completely get it off, but the tinted charcoal can be lifted just a bit. The graphitin can as well. Again, just a bit. Do not use any of these with water thinking that you're going to be able to completely remove it. But again, the water, the fact that these are water soluble tools is, I think, the strength of them. Like I love that I can use tinted charcoal, that it actually gets ingrained in the paper, that I can then layer it, as opposed to using dry charcoal, which to me is quite messy. And I can achieve a lot of the same charcoal look, but it's much more permanent than it would be if I'm just using like charcoal pencils. So your Inktense is Inktense is not going to come up at all. I would, this is all dry. Like, I can't blend it. I can't erase it. It is part of your paper and it's not going anywhere. But again, you know what? Derwent actually has a lot of really good videos showing the permanence of Inktense, because that's why people buy them. That is their main strength. They're so vibrant. They are so permanent, and you can continue to layer them and you're not going to muddy your colors. So remember that about the Inktense. What else?
All right. Couple more. Thoughts about how you transfer these techniques to drawing a human face?
Oh, goodness. Oh, man. I don't even know how to begin.
Yeah, we ordered the ones with our logo on it.
You could go back and watch the YouTube video of our last event, which was portraits in watercolor. If that's how.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many answers to that, but
Okay,
I don't even know where to begin. Like when I do face, first of all, I don't do a ton of faces. I do more when I'm doing like children's books, but I don't do a lot of like portraits, human portraits. I do a lot of pet portraits, but not human portraits, which pet portraits are obviously a very different texture than like human skin. I will say, if you are into doing portraits, definitely check out this shade and tone mixed media set. Get yourself this because the colors were specifically made to create different skin tones. And the other thing you get in here, which I haven't even used yet because I don't really use pencils all that much. Well, I use Inktense.
coincidentally, Abby, somebody just said, or has said, I have the shade and tone set. It includes 3 pencils, drawing, graphic, and onyx. What would you use these types of pencils to create?
Oh no,
Funny.
I've never
Way to
used.
go, Teresa. You're like totally boy.
I have never used these. I'm a water soluble pencil user. I am not I've never used these.
What do you have there? It's so is
guys-
that a 3B?
Yeah, so there's a 3B, there's a terracotta. So this is a Derwent drawing pencil.
And then the onyx, which is likely a really dark.
Yeah,
Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, it looks like they're just more I think the shade and tone set probably has different tones of the sanguine or that are in there. It's a traditional underpainting sketch drawing pencil because it usually blends in. It's a neutral. The 3B drawing pencil is a soft drawing piece pencil, which means the line lays down darker than, your standard number 2 pencil is an HB. So anything with a higher B is for soft, will be darker when you go and softer when you go to draw with it. And then the dark one is really probably like a 9B if you wanted to, really good for shadows.
I use a lot of these colors, again, like water soluble. I don't use the pencils, but I use a lot of these colors as just like the base tone for any faces that I'm doing, any skin tones that I'm doing.
That makes sense. Absolutely.
What else? Anything else?
Let me see.
Where do I get my seashells from?
Yeah, where do you get your seashells?
These were from
Ohio
Kiowa.
doesn't have a seashore, so
Yeah.
we're gonna go to the beach.
I got these from Kiowa Island, South Carolina.
I've been there.
Oh, I love it. I love it
Really
down.
nice.
Yeah. Which if anyone's ever been there, it's a very like pristine, natural beach, like it's like when a hurricane comes through and if there are a whole bunch of logs on the beach, they're all just there. There's like a really pretty grittiness to it that I love. And when I was adding like the texture here and all the texture to the seashells, it reminded me of that. Like it's a different beach as compared to like the Florida beaches that are white, that super white sand. Kiowa's a little bit grittier than that. Do you agree, Tara?
100%.
Yeah, I love it. I was there with my mother-in-law and I think she was used to like Florida beaches and she was like, all of these shells are everywhere and these like the wood that has been washed ashore. And she thought that somebody was kind of supposed to come and clean it up. And I was like, no, that's what it's all about.
I love that. That's hilarious.
But yeah, I love Kiowa.
It's a special place.
Yes.
Any special cleaning of the brush?
No, not that, not that I would say, although, you know what, guys, I'll be honest, I'm I'm pretty dirty when it comes to my brushes, and you can probably tell from my palette. No, I always just wash mine in water. I will say, so I have so many of these. Like, this is ridiculous. But I've collected them over time because I travel with them all the time and they're all different sizes. I have gotten questions in the past about like how the bristles just take on color over time. I mean, they're white bristles, so they're gonna do that. It never like bleed, like even though the bristles look, they're like a purplish gray, that never bleeds into my artwork, if that makes sense. So no, I just clean them like regular. I will say it's cool that you can use, let me show you. You can kind of like clean them from the inside out by filling it with water, and then you just squeeze it and the water comes out the tip, which I don't know if you guys can see, but it'll give your brush a really good cleaning.
Nice. Yeah, those, I mean, travel brushes are fantastic. I mean, it's just, especially when you're on the go.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tara, I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, if you get for anyone who doesn't have any of these palettes, these palettes do come with this little water brush, which comes with a lid. Okay, so you'll get this water brush in there, which has, I think it's actually like the very same tips that come on these guys. It's just that you can buy these they're both Derwent products. You can buy these as like a set, whereas every time you get a paint pan palette, any of them, whether it's Inktense, Graphitint, Shade and Tone, Mixed Media, you'll get one of these brushes, and I love these as well. They have great tips on them.
And is that, do they both have buttons, or is the,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so, well, this has like an actual button on it. It says
The other one, you just push the barrel, so that is a difference. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think this one is a little bit easier to push if you're going to use it that way. Again, I rarely use either one with the by pushing the barrel or the button. I tend to use them more just with like a cup of water as a traditional brush, but it's super handy if you're outside, if you don't want to have to worry about carrying a cup of water and you just have like, you know, a bottle of water and you keep filling it up. These can be a really nice little travel tool for you.
I think the theory behind the button versus the barrel that to push the water through is that the button gives like a controlled amount of water if that's consistent, whereas the barrel is reliant on how much, the water that comes out is however much pressure you put on the barrel. That's how it's been explained to me. So because we have different brands, and we carry both the button version and the barrel version.
Okay. I do want to show one more thing, you guys. For anybody that's still on this, I meant to show this earlier. I was between which seashells I wanted to paint with you guys today, and I just want to show you with all of, okay, so with all of, because I was experimenting, I was like, okay, I can only put so many colors into one little toolkit for them. This does use mauve, which did not come in the kit. I realize that, but the only additional color that this used is mauve, and I just want to show it because like I think it's pretty cool how many different seashells you can paint with just, how many pieces was that? Like 5, it was 5 colors, right, Tara? It was 4 paint pans and then the tan. Yeah. So anyway, I meant to show that.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think we can take one more question before we go. Joanne, the age-old question, watercolor, how do you stop yourself from overworking?
Oh, I mean, sometimes you just do, and then you ruin your painting. Over time, you just learn that Okay, here's one rule. If you notice that your paper is starting to break down, you've definitely overworked. So stop at that point. If you've noticed that your colors are getting muddy, you've definitely overworked. So stop at that point. But what I always recommend is if you are even getting close to the point that you think that you might be done, let your colors dry, because often they're going to look a little different once they are dry. Let them dry and then decide if you want to go back. Less is usually better.
Which is why I don't mess with watercolor.
Mhm.
I give you all a lot of credit because if I can't cover up my mistakes easily, I feel a little lost. So, all right, well, I think we can wrap up now. Abby, that was amazing as always. We sincerely appreciate everything that you did today. I learned a ton of new stuff. I'm getting all of this love in the comments here.
Good.
Which is fantastic and greatly appreciated. So pat yourself on the back. Good job.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this. I love putting these together. I love the challenge really of putting together like I just said before, the kit of just 5. I think it's great to challenge yourself to try to create a whole painting just using 5 colors. So love that part of it. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I want to see this gallery view.
Yes. So if you wouldn't mind, folks, if you could change the view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen from speaker view to gallery view, turn your camera on and share your work, please. Can't wait to see. Oh my God, it's gonna be so great. Ooh, Stephen, nice job.
Beautiful.
Elizabeth, Cynthia, you guys. Emily, Virginia. Oh, wow.
They're gorgeous.
They really are. And I think it's a testament to one, how talented our folks are, and then 2, to what a great teacher you are, Abby, that they all turned out so well.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for saying that. These are beautiful. You know what else I'm actually really happy, just like a quick look at them. I'm noticing, I don't know if everybody else is, but I'm noticing like in a lot of them, there's definitely that darker shadowing in the second shell as compared to the first one, which I'm happy about because I wanted you guys to see just by like adding that sepia ink, that Inktense, as opposed to just using the tinted charcoal, how much darker you could get that shading. These are beautiful. I love the gallery view. Wow.
Right? Isn't this amazing? I get so excited. It's my favorite part.
They're beautiful. Do you do a screenshot of these, Tara?
Yeah, we do. We can send it to you if you like.
Yeah.
Okay. That'd be great. All right. Thank you all so much. We sincerely appreciate everything. Hope to see you at the next event. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Derwent. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.